Imagine opening your kitchen cabinets tonight and discovering that many of your quiet little habits, the way you store certain foods, the way you combine flavors, the way you time your meals, all gently echo choices made hundreds of years ago. Not from modern science, not from trendy diets, but from everyday medieval life. Back then, food wasn't just something people ate. It shaped their routines, their schedules, their manners, even their sense of comfort. And what's most surprising is this: so many of those habits never disappeared. They simply slipped into the future, quietly carried from one generation to the next, until they arrived in your kitchen without you even realizing it. Tonight on Boring History for Sleep, we're going to wander slowly through the forgotten rules of medieval eating, the simple customs, gentle habits, and practical choices that people made long before refrigerators, supermarkets, and electric stoves, and how many of them still sit quietly on our plates today. No drama, no rush, just a calm walk through the past and the little echoes of it that live in our modern routines. But before we sink into this peaceful story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling us your favorite simple food from everyday life. Your support helps this channel drift through history night after night. Now, breathe softly, settle in, and let's begin. If you could step quietly into a medieval kitchen, just for a moment, without changing anything, without making a sound, you would probably feel a surprising sense of recognition. The room would look old in every possible way. A hearth instead of a stove, wooden tables instead of polished countertops, bunches of herbs drying from beams instead of neatly arranged jars, clay bowls stacked where glass would sit today. And yet, even amid all this difference, there is something oddly familiar: the subtle rhythm, the way people move, the logic guiding their choices. Much of it would reflect the small, everyday habits many of us still follow today without even realizing it. At dawn, medieval kitchens didn't explode into sudden activity. People didn't wake up and immediately start chopping or boiling. Instead, the day began with preparation. Slow, thoughtful preparation that looked calm on the surface but carried centuries of practical wisdom beneath it. Medieval cooks knew that food needed time. Not just cooking time, but the quiet intervals before cooking even began. They soaked what needed soaking. They softened what needed softening. They let what needed resting simply rest. And strangely enough, even in our modern kitchens filled with timers, beeping appliances, and recipe apps, we still follow the same unspoken rule. We soak dry beans overnight. We rest dough before baking. We thaw ingredients before cooking. We marinate, slow simmer, preheat, let things rise and settle and breathe. Not because anyone told us to copy medieval habits, but because certain truths about food simply endure across centuries. In medieval kitchens, patience wasn't a technique. It was the only way to make meals work. A pot placed near the outer edge of the hearth might gently warm for hours. A bowl of grains left to soak overnight transformed into tomorrow's porridge. Dough rested near the warm stones, protected from chilly drafts by nothing more than a cloth. All of this happened because medieval people simply watched food carefully and learned its rhythms. And so the logic of patience traveled forward with human experience, turning into everyday habits that feel instinctive even now. When you wait instead of rushing, when you let ingredients transform gently over time, you're following a quiet rule medieval kitchens invented long before recipe books ever mentioned it. The structure of meals themselves carries medieval fingerprints too. In that world, people didn't eat heavy foods late in the day. A substantial meal belonged to earlier hours when energy was needed for work. Evenings called for simple bowls of warm food or mild bread-based meals. This wasn't about health theories, just centuries of practical life shaping natural habits. Today, many people still follow this pattern without thinking. Breakfast remains simple, midday meals steady, evening dishes lighter. This gentle rhythm feels normal because it has lived within communities for so long that it became part of our collective sense of comfort. And there's another quiet connection: the way medieval cooks organized ingredients. They divided foods not by nutritional categories, but by pure practicality. Dry items stayed far from moisture. Herbs were kept within easy reach. Vegetables were used quickly once harvested. Strong-smelling foods were stored separately because their scent traveled easily. When you open your kitchen cabinet today and instinctively place grains in a dry, place vegetables in a cool one, bread wrapped or sealed, and fragrant items tucked apart, you're repeating a medieval storage system that worked so well it simply never disappeared. Even flavor choices carry echoes from that era. Medieval cooks rarely overwhelmed dishes with too many competing tastes. They relied on simple, familiar combinations: bread with warm stews, mild porridges paired with fruit, basic herbs added to vegetables, small touches of sweetness balanced with warmth. Their food was shaped by what was available, but also by the understanding that meals should feel comforting rather than complicated. And incredibly, many modern comfort foods follow the exact same philosophy. Not because we think about history while eating, but because warm simplicity is something humans naturally preserve. If you could watch a medieval cook work, you'd notice another habit that feels familiar: cooking with the senses. Without digital scales, measuring cups, or calibrated ovens, medieval people relied entirely on touch, smell, taste, and sound. They pressed dough gently with their fingers to test its readiness. They leaned over pots to judge aroma. They tasted broth to find balance. They listened to the crackle of fire to estimate its heat. And even though modern technology surrounds us, many home cooks still taste, touch, and listen just as medieval cooks once did. It is an instinctive form of trust. Trust in the ingredient, in the process, in the hand rather than the tool. The seasonal rhythm of eating also has deep medieval origins. Long before food availability expanded globally, medieval kitchens lived in complete cooperation with the seasons. Warm months meant fresh vegetables and fruits. Cooler months meant preserved goods, dried grains, and stored produce. Today we have access to everything year-round, yet emotional food habits still follow the old cycle. In summer, people crave lighter foods. In winter, warm soups and baked dishes feel natural. Not because we must, but because centuries of seasonal cooking shaped our sense of comfort around certain tastes at certain times. Waste was nearly unthinkable in medieval kitchens. Every bit of food was repurposed. Yesterday's stew became tomorrow's thicker dish. Hard bread turned into a new meal once softened in broth. Leftovers were not a burden. They were part of the structure of eating itself. And today, even with abundant options, many households still save leftovers, reheat meals, store extra portions, and treat food as something valuable. That quiet care for what we have is one of the strongest threads linking us to those old kitchens. If you continued standing in that medieval kitchen, you'd see people moving calmly, almost gracefully, through routines that shaped generations. A woman kneads dough slowly, folding it with practiced hands. A man stirs a pot while glancing at the fire's glow, adjusting its distance by instinct rather than measurement. A child helps hang herbs or carry a bundle of grains, learning through observation rather than instruction. Every action carries a steady, easy rhythm, one that feels close to the gentle rituals many of us perform today when preparing familiar meals. There is something remarkable about this continuity. We don't think of ourselves as following medieval rules when we cook. We don't imagine centuries of cooks standing behind us, guiding our everyday habits. We simply prepare meals the way they feel right. And maybe that is the point. These medieval habits survived not because they were written down as strict rules, but because they were natural, sensible, comforting, and endlessly practical. They flowed quietly through generations, passed from one pair of hands to another, from hearth to stove, from slow kitchens to fast ones, from instinct to instinct. And today, in your own kitchen, whether you're boiling water, storing vegetables, kneading dough, saving leftovers, or seasoning a simple dish, you are repeating movements shaped long before any modern idea of cooking existed. The medieval kitchen didn't disappear. It simply softened into the background of our routines. Its rhythms became our rhythms. Its habits blended into our instincts. And its quiet, practical rules still guide the way we prepare, store, taste, and enjoy food without us ever needing to name them. In the next chapter, we will drift deeper into the heart of those kitchens, exploring how the design of medieval cooking spaces influenced the layout of modern ones, and how the placement of tools, hearths, work tables, and storage subtly shaped the way we organize and move through our own kitchens today. If you imagine a medieval kitchen, you might picture a stone hearth glowing with soft firelight, wooden tables worn smooth from decades of use, bundles of herbs hanging from beams, clay pots lined carefully on shelves, and baskets tucked into corners filled with grains, fruits, or vegetables. It feels distant, ancient, almost like stepping into another world entirely. And yet, if you observe closely, you'll begin to notice something unexpected. The flow of the room, the way people move within it, the placement of tools, and the quiet logic behind its design all echo the shape and rhythm of the modern kitchens we use every day. Not because modern kitchens try to imitate medieval ones, but because the earliest kitchens discovered certain truths about cooking spaces, truths so practical and intuitive that they never needed to be reinvented. They simply continued, quietly and naturally, through centuries. If you stood in a medieval kitchen at the start of the day, everything would seem deceptively simple. There were no cabinets, no drawers, no appliances, and yet the room was organized in a way that allowed work to happen smoothly. Food preparation had a flow to it, a gentle choreography of steps that made sense then and still make sense today. Objects weren't placed randomly. Everything had its place because the tasks of the day depended on that silent arrangement. Someone lighting the morning fire knew exactly where wood was stored. Someone preparing a dough knew where to find grain, water, salt, and the tools to grind or mix them. And if you think of your own kitchen, whether it's large or small, modern or modest, you likely recognize the same quiet order. You know where the spices are, where tools sit, where ingredients are stored, where the cooking area is, where the washing happens. Even without a detailed plan, you've arranged your kitchen in a way that flows naturally according to your habits, a pattern inherited from countless kitchens before yours. The medieval kitchen was centered around one unmistakable feature: the hearth. It was the heart of the home, the source of warmth, cooking, and comfort. Nearly every step in the cooking process revolved around it. Food was placed closer or farther from the fire depending on how much heat it needed. Pots hung from hooks or sat on stones around the flame. People stirred, flipped, lifted, and lowered ingredients with a gentle awareness of the fire's personality. Though our modern kitchens look very different, the quiet truth remains the same. Every kitchen is designed around its heat source. Whether it's a gas stove, an electric range, or even a microwave, the room still orients itself around where cooking happens. Counters are arranged around the stove so preparation can happen nearby. Tools are placed within reach. Spices sit close enough to add while cooking. The work triangle, stove, sink, and storage, is something modern designers talk about as if it's new. Yet medieval kitchens already used their own version of this triangle long before the concept was named. The fire, the table, and the water source formed a natural triangle that shaped movement. People in those kitchens walked the same patterns we walk today, simply because they made sense. But even beyond heat, medieval kitchens had another quiet rule that survives unchanged: the separation of spaces. Rooms weren't divided by walls, but by intention. The area closest to the fire was for cooking. The table nearby was for cutting, mixing, assembling. Another corner was for storing dry goods, kept safely away from heat and moisture. Fresh vegetables were stored where air could circulate. Water was gathered or poured in a specific place. Even washing tools had their own spot, where bowls and cloths were kept ready. Today, regardless of architecture, most kitchens follow the same instinctive divisions: a space for cooking, a space for preparation, a space for storage, a space for cleaning. It doesn't matter whether the kitchen is spacious or compact, the pattern emerges naturally because it simply works. This structure wasn't invented recently. It was discovered in kitchens that relied entirely on intuition, practice, and daily repetition. If you look closer at medieval kitchens, you'd see that tools were kept visible rather than hidden away. Pots hung from hooks. Knives rested on wooden boards. Bowls sat on open shelves. Ingredients were stored where they could be easily reached. This wasn't done for decoration. It was necessity. They needed to grab what they needed quickly, often while tending multiple tasks at once. The idea of storing things out in the open to make them easy to use still exists today. Modern kitchens with open shelves, magnetic knife racks, or hanging pans are quietly repeating a medieval idea. Keep frequently used tools within sight and reach, because cooking flows more naturally that way. Even the placement of herbs in medieval kitchens feels familiar. They were hung where warmth could dry them slowly. but also where cooks could pluck them easily while preparing meals. That habit survives not only in culinary tradition, but in the modern desire to keep herbs visible on windowsills, counters, or shelves. The idea isn't just practical, it creates a sense of comfort. Medieval kitchens knew that having herbs within reach made cooking smoother, and that familiarity stayed with us even after kitchens changed shape entirely. One of the most enduring medieval kitchen principles is the idea of keeping transitions smooth, moving gradually from one task to another. After cutting, you didn't carry ingredients across the room. The chopping table sat near the fire so ingredients could be placed into pots without delay. Grains were ground near where they were stored. Water was kept close to where it would be heated. Everything flowed from one step to the next. Modern kitchens, for all their variety, still rely on this silent logic. The sink sits near the preparation area. The preparation area sits near the stove. Spices sit near the cooking zone. Cooking tools sit close to where dishes will be served. You might never think about it consciously, but your kitchen probably continues this same medieval flow. Another deep-rooted similarity hides in the way medieval kitchens balanced chaos and order. They were often busy places, full of motions, smells, heat, and noise, and yet they maintained a sense of calm. Tools returned to their places because they needed to be found easily. Ingredients stayed organized for efficiency. Today, we speak about keeping the kitchen tidy, but the idea goes far back. It wasn't about cleanliness alone, it was about preserving flow. Too much clutter broke the rhythm of cooking. Too much disorder slowed down meal preparation. So even without modern organizational strategies, medieval people kept their kitchens arranged in stable, predictable ways that feel surprisingly modern. And then there is the role of daylight. Medieval kitchens relied heavily on natural light, placing tables near windows, doors, or open areas. Work was often done in the brightest part of the day simply because artificial light was limited. Even now, kitchens, whether intentionally or accidentally, are often placed where natural light reaches them. People still prefer preparing meals in well-lit spaces. We still gravitate toward windows when chopping or washing. This instinct is older than electric lamps. It is rooted in centuries when sunlight was essential for even the simplest kitchen tasks. If you imagine yourself in that medieval kitchen, stepping back and watching quietly, you might notice one more profound truth shared with modern homes. The kitchen wasn't just a workspace. It was the emotional center of the home. People gathered there for warmth, conversation, comfort, and the familiar sounds of daily life. Children sat nearby while adults prepared dough. Friends and neighbors talked near the fire. Meals were built from simple moments inside that room. And today, despite the changes in design and technology, the kitchen remains the heart of many homes. It is still where people gather, talk, share, and prepare food together. It is where the ordinary moments of the day quietly collect. The medieval kitchen may have looked different, shaped by fire rather than electricity, stone instead of steel, wood instead of plastic, but its ideas survived. Not as strict rules, and not as traditions people intentionally preserved, but as natural solutions to everyday needs. Modern kitchens evolved, but the logic underneath them stayed the same. The way you move in your kitchen, the way you reach for tools, the places you store things. The way you divide spaces and follow rhythms. All of these actions echo a world that cooked slowly, thoughtfully, and close to the earth. The medieval kitchen lives quietly inside our modern ones, not as a memory, but as a structure. It shaped the spaces we cook in today, the instincts we follow without thinking, the ease with which we move from one task to another. It left behind no textbooks or diagrams. It simply left habits. And every time you prepare a meal, whether quickly or slowly, simply or creatively, you are participating in a rhythm that began around a hearth centuries ago, carried forward not by rule, but by comfort, logic, and the timeless human need to cook in spaces that feel natural. In the next chapter, we will drift deeper into the daily routines of medieval food preparation, exploring how the rhythms of gathering, chopping, storing, and seasoning created patterns we still follow today, often without ever realizing their origins. If you picture a medieval household starting its day, you might imagine a world so distant from ours that nothing would feel the same. And yet if you watched closely, you would realize how many of their quiet routines still live gently inside our own daily habits. Medieval people didn't write down a list of food rules. nor did they consciously create a system meant to last for centuries. Their routines formed naturally from the way they lived, the tools they used, the seasons they depended on, and the time it took for food to become food. Over hundreds of years, these routines became patterns. Over thousands, they became instincts. And today, without even thinking, many of us follow those same patterns in the way we shop, prepare, handle, and consume food. A medieval day often began not with cooking, but with gathering. Families rose early, sometimes before the sun, and the first thought wasn't what to eat, but what needed preparing. Bread dough that was left resting overnight might need attention. Grains could be checked for soaking. Water might be fetched from wells or streams. Herbs needed to be inspected, sometimes crushed, sometimes hung to dry. These quiet morning tasks weren't busy or frantic. They were slow, steady, and purposeful, movements shaped by experience. If you imagine someone preparing grains for the day by rinsing, sorting, or soaking them, you'll recognize echoes of our own routines. Rinsing rice, washing vegetables, thawing meats, or checking rising dough. The first steps of modern cooking still resemble the first steps of medieval cooking more than we often realize. As the day progressed, food preparation unfolded in stages rather than all at once. Medieval kitchens rarely produced meals in one single burst of activity. Instead, tasks were spaced throughout the day. Something might simmer for hours. Something else might cool or settle in a covered pot. Another ingredient might dry near the fire. Today, we follow similar rhythms, even in the fast pace of modern life. Broths simmer slowly. Dough rests between steps. Vegetables are chopped ahead of time. Ingredients are left to marinate. These small pauses are not modern inventions. They are the natural continuation of cooking methods discovered long ago. One of the most persistent medieval habits is the idea of prepping ahead. Medieval households didn't have the luxury of instant meals or fast cooking. They had to think ahead constantly. A stew for the afternoon required morning preparation. A loaf of bread for the next day needed yesterday's dough. Even something as simple as a warm drink required firewood that had been collected and dried well in advance. This thoughtful rhythm, prepare now for something you'll enjoy later, is still deeply embedded in modern kitchens. You might prepare lunches ahead of time, chop ingredients early, soak foods overnight, or defrost something in the morning. These actions feel natural because they echo a way of life that lasted centuries. When midday arrived, households often shared their most substantial meal of the day. This was not a forced rule. It evolved from practical needs. People worked hard physically, and they needed strength at the time of day when the sun was high and the tasks were heaviest. Eating heavily before sleep made little sense. So the substantial meal naturally settled into the middle hours. Modern life still follows this pattern in subtle ways. Even when schedules vary, many cultures maintain the tradition of a solid midday meal and a lighter evening one. It isn't a rule written anywhere, but a rhythm that survived because it matched human energy patterns so comfortably. After this midday meal, the kitchen didn't fall silent. Medieval households used the afternoon to handle storing, drying, cooling, and organizing the food that would be needed later. This was the time to preserve leftover grains, to cool pots of broth, to separate portions that might be used again. Modern kitchens follow this same instinct. After meals, we store leftovers, cool dishes, wrap in used portions, and prepare items for the next use. It is a quiet transition from eating to preparing, one that seamlessly bridges medieval and modern times. Another medieval food rhythm that survives today is the natural separation between fresh tasks and preserving tasks. Fresh tasks, like washing vegetables or kneading dough, usually happen early in the day, close to the time when ingredients were gathered or delivered. Preserving tasks, like drying, salting, or storing, happen later, after everything had been sorted and portioned. Though modern preservation is far simpler thanks to refrigeration and storage options, we still instinctively separate tasks this way. Fresh foods get cleaned and prepared when they arrive. Leftovers and unused items are stored later. It's a flow we rarely think about, yet it mirrors a structure that existed for hundreds of years. Medieval people also understood the quiet importance of meal timing. Meals weren't obligations, they were anchors in the day. A morning meal started things gently. A midday meal fueled work. An evening meal slowed everything down. Even today, people often rely on meals to organize their time. Breakfast helps the day begin with intention. Lunch divides tasks and gives a break. Dinner becomes a moment to settle and unwind. These rhythms feel natural because human lives have relied on them for centuries. Another subtle medieval habit still present in our routines is the idea of effort around heat. In a medieval kitchen, tending the fire was a main responsibility. It determined when meals could begin, how long they could last, and how many tasks could happen at once. Because of this, medieval cooks learned to group tasks logically around the warming and cooling of flames. When the hearth was hottest, they cooked dishes requiring strong heat. As the fire mellowed, they simmered or warmed milder foods. When the fire dimmed, they allowed foods to rest or settle. Today, even though we no longer rely on open hearths, we still organize our cooking around the behavior of heat. We cook dishes requiring high temperatures first while the oven is hot. We simmer soups after boiling. We prepare quick dishes last, using residual warmth or lower settings. We preheat, cook, reduce, simmer, and keep warm. The same sequence medieval cooks once followed naturally, guided by the glow of fire rather than by numbers on a dial. Medieval kitchens also had a quiet rhythm of cleaning and resetting between tasks, which still appears in modern kitchens today. People didn't wait until the end of the day to tidy up. They cleared the table after preparation. They cleaned tools right after using them, so they could be reused again for the next step. Today, even with running water and modern sinks, many people follow this same instinct, cleaning as they go, keeping the workspace orderly, and returning items to their places as tasks shift. It isn't a rule. It's a rhythm inherited from kitchens where clutter slowed down cooking and cleanliness meant efficiency. Perhaps one of the most surprisingly enduring medieval habits relates to seasoning. Medieval households seasoned in layers, adding herbs early in some dishes, late in others, and always with an emphasis on subtlety. They used small amounts frequently rather than large amounts occasionally. Today, modern home cooks still taste as they go, adjust flavors gently, and add seasoning gradually. This style of seasoning reflects a deep human instinct. Flavors must unfold slowly. It is a habit carried not through books or rules, but through hundreds of years of people trusting their senses around cooking fires. Even shopping patterns today echo medieval rhythms. Because medieval homes could not store everything indefinitely, families learned to gather fresh items regularly and store non-perishables for longer. Many modern households do the same. Weekly grocery trips for fresh produce, and monthly or seasonal stocking for long-lasting goods like grains or spices. These patterns feel logical because they mirror centuries of household management shaped long before supermarkets existed. Another quiet medieval habit still alive today is the idea that some foods belong together simply because experience taught it. Bread and warm dishes, vegetables with stews, fruits after meals, warm drinks in the morning, cool water late in the day. These pairings weren't invented for nutrition charts. They evolved through daily repetition, and we still follow many of them instinctively. Toward evening, medieval kitchens slowed down. Work softened. The hearth glowed gently instead of fiercely. People used the remaining warmth to prepare simple dishes that calmed rather than energized. Meals became lighter, quiet, and soothing. Even today, our evening meals often mirror this approach. We choose simpler foods, softer flavors, slower preparations. It feels natural because it has always felt natural in human households. In the final hours of the day, medieval families often prepared for tomorrow. Grains might be soaked, dough might be left to rest, vegetables might be cleaned or sorted. These little tasks made the next day easier and smoother. And today, we still do similar things. Pack lunches, soak ingredients, take items from the freezer, or plan meals for the next day. It is the same rhythm, a gentle bridge between days. What's remarkable about these routines is that they were never officially taught. Medieval cooks didn't write down a rulebook saying, prepare ahead, cook in stages, store wisely, or taste often. They simply lived those rhythms because they made sense. Generations repeated them. Children watched their parents. Adults repeated what they had seen. And slowly, these patterns became so deeply woven into daily life that even after the world changed dramatically, the rhythms remained. Modern kitchens feel different in every surface, tool, and noise. Yet beneath that surface, the same ancient sequences guide our movements. We begin with preparation. We work in stages. We rely on heat patterns. We reset between tasks. We store thoughtfully. We taste and adjust. We follow the clock of meals as naturally as medieval people did. Cooking didn't change as much as our tools did. The logic stayed the same. The rhythms stayed the same. The instincts stayed the same. And every day, without noticing, we continue quietly performing these small, ancient rituals, echoes of kitchens lit by firelight, shaped by patience, and guided by the gentle understanding that food needs time, care, and rhythm. In the next chapter, we'll drift deeper into medieval food culture, exploring how traditions around sharing, serving, hosting, and gathering shaped customs that still influence how we eat together today. If you imagine a medieval meal, perhaps you see wooden tables, low benches, clay dishes, and a warm glow coming from the hearth. People gathered close, some sitting, some standing, some simply leaning with relaxed familiarity. The scene feels distant from modern dining rooms, yet something about it feels strangely recognizable. Not because the objects are similar, they aren't, but because the way people shared food, served one another, and organized mealtime carried instincts that quietly shaped the way we still eat together today. Long before formal dining etiquette, long before anyone wrote down proper manners, medieval people simply followed rhythms that worked, patterns that made meals smoother, more comfortable, and more communal. And those patterns, passed down through generations not as strict rules, but as natural habits, still appear in our everyday lives. If you walked into a medieval household just as a meal was being prepared, the first thing you'd see is how collective the process was. No one person did everything alone. Someone fetched bread. Someone prepared vegetables. Someone tended the fire. Someone set out bowls or cups. This wasn't a ceremonial act. It was routine. Everyone contributed. Even children carried something small or helped stir a dish. That quiet cooperation still exists today. Families pass plates around the table. Friends help set dishes when visiting. Even in restaurants, we instinctively share tasks. Someone pours water, someone arranges the napkins, someone moves items to make space. We still feel the old medieval instinct that eating is something people do together, not separately. When medieval meals began, the table formed the emotional center of the home. People didn't eat scattered throughout the house unless necessary. They gathered in one place, not because it was polite, but because gathering made sense. Warmth, light, conversation, and food all needed to be in the same space. Today, despite busier schedules and modern lifestyles, many families still prefer sharing meals at a central table. Even small apartments make space for a dining spot. It feels comforting to eat together, a feeling shaped by centuries when mealtime anchored people to one another. Another familiar medieval habit appears in the way food was placed on the table. Instead of plating individual portions for each person, people set dishes in the middle for everyone to share. Stews, breads, vegetables, fruits, all placed within reach, encouraging conversation and cooperation. This shared plate method wasn't only practical, it created a sense of closeness. People reached, passed, and offered food. We still follow this basic pattern today. Whether it's a family meal, a gathering with friends, or a buffet-style dinner, the idea of placing dishes for everyone to take from remains a natural and comforting rhythm. Medieval people also believed in easing into meals, not rushing the first bite. They waited for everyone to gather, not because of strict etiquette, but because eating together felt right. That quiet pause, the moment before the first spoonful, still survives in many households today. People wait for others to sit down. They allow conversations to settle. They often start the meal together, marking a shared moment of transition between daily activity and the nourishment ahead. Another medieval food rule that slipped quietly into modern habits is the preference for beginning meals with simple foods before moving to richer ones. Medieval tables often started with light broths or bread, followed by heartier dishes, and finished with something mild or sweet. This wasn't a planned menu, just a natural flow that felt comfortable. Today, many meals unconsciously follow the same pattern: a light starter, a main dish, then something soothing at the end. The idea of pacing a meal wasn't invented in cookbooks. It came from centuries of people learning how to enjoy food comfortably. You might also recognize the soft medieval rhythm where meals created space for conversation. People didn't eat in silence unless the situation required it. They talked slowly, shared stories, discussed tasks, and enjoyed moments of rest. Conversations were part of the meal, not interruptions. Today, people still talk over food. Meals become pauses in the day when people reconnect. Even when eating alone, many people watch something, listen to something, or reflect. Actions that mirror the medieval instinct to let meals be social or contemplative rather than rushed. Another quiet influence appears in the way medieval households handled serving and passing food. People offered dishes to one another before serving themselves. They handed bread or poured drinks for those nearby. This wasn't a rule, it was simple kindness built into daily life. Even now, in modern households or gatherings, the same gestures survive. People pour water for others before themselves, pass plates around, or ask if anyone needs more. These acts feel natural because they re-ancient. They formed in kitchens where survival and comfort depended on cooperation. The relationship to seating also carries medieval traces. In medieval times, seating arrangements weren't rigid, but certain patterns formed naturally. Elders sat where they could oversee the table. Children gathered together. Guests were offered places near the warmth or near those hosting the meal. The principle was simple: make people feel comfortable and respected. Today, we still instinctively place guests in favorable spots, seat children together, or arrange ourselves according to comfort and familiarity. It's not because anyone dictated it. It's because mealtime hierarchy and hospitality evolved from medieval households that welcomed people intuitively. Another enduring medieval habit is the quiet organization of the table itself. Bread often sat in a central position. Salt or herbs were placed within reach. Cups were positioned in predictable spots. Utensils were kept consistent. Even though our table settings look far more elaborate now, the underlying logic remains similar. We place frequently used items in the center. We keep utensils in familiar spots. We arrange tables for smooth sharing and passing. These choices make meals easier, but they also reflect centuries of accumulated understanding. Toward the end of medieval meals, people slowed down naturally. There was no hurry to stand up once the last bite was taken. Meals were moments of rest. Even after the main food was eaten, people lingered, talking, warming by the fire, finishing drinks, or simply sitting quietly. This lingering instinct still lives in modern meals. People remain at the table after eating. They chat, reflect, scroll through their phones, or enjoy the final minutes of company. Something about ending a meal slowly feels right, because humans have ended meals this way for centuries. And then comes another habit we rarely notice: the way cleanup happens. Medieval households didn't rush to clear the table, but when they did, it was often a collective effort. Someone gathered bowls. Someone stacked wooden platters. Someone wiped the table with a cloth. Someone tended the fire or moved pots away from heat. The idea was simple. Many hands make the end of the meal gentle. Today, cleanup patterns look surprisingly similar. People often clear the table together. Someone washes while someone dries. Someone tidies while someone puts leftovers away. It's a quiet continuation of a medieval rhythm that saw mealtime as a shared experience from start to finish. What ties all these medieval habits together is the understanding that eating was never just feeding the body. It was also about supporting one another, creating calm, sharing small tasks, and forming moments of connection within the day. These patterns weren't formal. They were instinctive. And because they were instinctive, they passed down naturally, even as homes, tools, and cultures changed dramatically. Modern meals look different. Our plates are brighter, our tools more varied, our tables more organized. But beneath these differences, the way we gather, share, serve, talk, linger, and clean all continue to follow medieval rhythms so deeply rooted in human experience that we rarely notice them. It is one of the clearest examples of how the past still lives quietly inside the present, not as a conscious memory, but as a feeling of what mealtime should be. In the next chapter, we'll drift into the world of medieval ingredients themselves, exploring how the availability, storage, and handling of certain foods shaped habits and choices we continue to make often without realizing how old those habits truly are. If you were to walk through a medieval pantry, carefully observing how people handled different foods, you would notice patterns so familiar that it might feel as if nothing has changed at all, even though hundreds of years stand between their kitchens and ours. The containers look different, the environments are simpler, the tools are more basic, but the logic behind how ingredients are stored, chosen, and prepared is almost exactly the same as the quiet habits we follow today. What makes this so remarkable is that medieval people didn't study food science or refrigeration. They didn't have nutritional charts, temperature guidelines, or airtight packaging. They relied on simple observation, centuries of watching what spoiled quickly, what stayed fresh longer, what needed certain conditions, and what paired well with what. And somehow, without announcing themselves, those observations became the unspoken rules that shape modern cooking even now. If you stood in a medieval pantry early in the morning, the first thing you'd see is the division between foods that must be eaten quickly and foods that can wait. Fresh vegetables, for example, were used almost immediately. They sat in cool corners, often on the floor or inside baskets that allowed air to flow. Medieval people knew that vegetables wilted fast, softened quickly, and lost their taste if ignored. Today, we still instinctively place fresh produce where it will be used soon. Refrigerators have replaced cool corners, but the rule is the same. Fresh foods don't wait. Grains in medieval homes were always kept dry and far away from moisture, because even the slightest dampness could ruin them. Wheat, barley, oats, and other grains sat inside sealed containers or high wooden bins. Modern households follow the exact same instinct, placing rice, flour, and cereals into airtight containers or dry cabinets. The shapes of our containers differ, but the ancient rule behind them remains unchanged. Grains stay good only when kept dry. Salt, one of the most precious medieval ingredients, was stored carefully not because it spoiled, but because it spoiled other things. Its strong presence influenced nearby foods, something medieval cooks learned quickly. Today, we still keep strong seasonings away from foods that absorb flavors easily. Spices sit together in cabinets. Pungent ingredients stay apart. We rarely pause to think about why, but medieval kitchens created this habit, separating strong scents to protect the delicate ones around them. Honey was perhaps the most cherished medieval sweetener. Medieval people treated it almost reverently, storing it in clay or wooden vessels, keeping it sealed against insects, and using it sparingly. Modern kitchens treat honey with similar respect. It sits sealed in jars, kept away from moisture, used in small but meaningful amounts. We may not think of ourselves as preserving an old tradition when we store honey this way, but we are following a rhythm learned centuries ago, when sweetness was precious and carefully guarded. Another ingredient medieval kitchens handled with gentle care was bread, a daily essential that everyone depended on. Bread was wrapped to keep it soft, protected from air that could harden it. When it inevitably became stale, medieval cooks didn't discard it. They turned it into new dishes, softened in soups, added to broths, or repurposed in other ways. Today, bread is still wrapped or sealed to preserve its softness, and even stale bread finds new life in dishes like crumbs, toasts, or casseroles. The logic feels instinctive, but its roots are long and deep. One of the most interesting medieval food habits involves fats and oils. People understood that oils needed protection from heat and light. They kept them in cool, dark places, not because they understood chemical reactions, but because they noticed oils spoiled faster when exposed. Modern kitchens continue the same pattern, bottles of oil placed in shaded cabinets, away from stovetops or windows. That quiet medieval observation became a permanent part of food storage. Medieval kitchens were also careful with dried foods. Dried herbs, dried fruits, dried fish, dried grains. Anything that had been processed for longevity was treated with respect. These foods represented security against seasons when fresh food was scarce. They were kept in sealed bags, cloths, or pots, safe from damp air. Today, dried foods still sit in closed containers, sometimes decorative jars, sometimes plastic packaging, but the principle is exactly the same. Another medieval ingredient still treated with nearly identical logic is cheese. Soft cheeses were eaten quickly. Harder ones were aged and stored properly. People wrapped cheese carefully to keep it from drying too fast, and they placed it in moderately cool areas. Our refrigerators changed the environment, but not the instinct. Soft cheese gets used fast. Hard cheese is stored longer. Cheese gets wrapped to prevent drying. Cheese sits in cooler spots. Again, we follow medieval habits without ever thinking about it. Even the way medieval people grouped ingredients survives today. Items used together were stored together. Flour near yeast, herbs near salt, pots near grains. Things that formed natural companions in cooking stayed side by side. Modern kitchens do the same. Spices sit together. Baking items share a cabinet. Oils and herbs stand near stoves. Storage becomes a reflection of cooking, the same way it did centuries ago. But perhaps the most surprising medieval ingredient rule still alive today relates to leftovers. Medieval households transformed older ingredients into new dishes not because it was fashionable, but because waste was unthinkable. Leftover grains became the base for another stew. Vegetables from yesterday appeared again as fillings. Pieces of bread softened into soup the next day. This cycle of renewal was a core medieval food habit, and today, millions of kitchens do the same. Not because they know medieval practice, but because the logic of using everything remains comforting, practical, and wise. One of the quietest medieval food habits still alive today is the preference for certain foods at certain times, guided not by nutritional rules, but by tradition and comfort. Fruits in the morning, warm dishes during cooler hours, broths when tired, simple foods at night. These weren't fixed rules, just gentle rhythms shaped by the seasons and by human experience. Modern food culture mirrors these rhythms beautifully, even with far more options available. It seems that centuries of instinct about what feels right to eat at different times simply stayed with us. Another medieval habit that traveled into modern kitchens is the idea that ingredients should rest. Medieval cooks allowed cooked foods to settle before serving. They let bread cool. They let dishes breathe before tasting. They understood that flavors deepen with time. Today, we still let dishes cool slightly before serving. We rest cooked food before slicing. We let flavors blend. Once again, technology changed, but instinct stayed. Perhaps the strongest medieval influence of all is the quiet awareness that every ingredient has its own needs. Some want darkness, some want cool air, some want dryness, some want immediate use, some want time, some want protection, some want space. Medieval cooks treated ingredients almost like personalities, unique and requiring patience. Modern cooks do the same. Without thinking, we store tomatoes one way and grains another. Bread gets soft treatment. Produce gets careful washing. Herbs get gentle handling. These behaviors aren't new. They simply traveled from one kitchen generation to the next. When you step back and imagine that medieval pantry again, baskets of roots, bowls of grains, neatly arranged herbs, covered pots of preserved foods, jars of honey, bundles of onions hanging from beams, it becomes clear just how much of that world still exists quietly inside our modern ones. We didn't inherit the exact tools. We didn't inherit the shapes of the rooms. But we inherited the logic, the instincts, the silent rules that made food last longer, taste better, or stay usable. What medieval kitchens taught wasn't written on scrolls or carved in stone. It was lived in daily life, passed through generations of cooks who trusted their eyes, ears, and hands. And today, without realizing it, we continue to follow those same gentle rules every time we open a cabinet, wrap leftovers, choose ingredients, or store food in places that simply feel right. In the next chapter, we'll explore how medieval traditions around flavor, taste, and balance quietly influence the way we season and combine foods today, revealing how our sense of what tastes right is shaped far more by the past than we often acknowledge. If you could sit beside a medieval cook for an afternoon, watching every movement, listening to every small decision, you would begin to understand something quietly astonishing. The way we season food today, how we balance flavors, how we build dishes, how we decide what works together, is largely shaped by instincts that were formed centuries ago. We don't think about where these instincts came from, because they feel natural. But beneath that sense of naturalness lies a long, gentle history of cooks discovering what made food comforting, balanced, and satisfying. Medieval seasoning wasn't about bold experiments or shocking combinations. It was about harmony. Cooks lived close to the land and close to the ingredients they used. They tasted things fresh, dried, warmed, softened, soaked, or cooked slowly over fire. They observed how flavors changed when paired together. Through generations of repetition, entire cultures built subconscious rules about what should be combined and what shouldn't. Those rules became the foundation of our modern flavor instincts. Imagine a medieval cook preparing a simple dish, a pot of warm vegetables stewing near the hearth. They don't grab 10 different herbs. They don't overwhelm the pot with intense seasoning. They choose 1 or 2 flavors, perhaps thyme and garlic, maybe rosemary and a pinch of salt. and let them melt slowly. This gentle approach, allowing each ingredient to express itself without being buried, became a core part of European cooking. And even today, many of our most familiar dishes follow that same pattern. A few well-chosen seasonings rather than a flood of them. Even the idea of pairing certain flavors with specific foods comes from medieval kitchens. Garlic with hearty vegetables, herbs with milder grains, warm spices with sweet dishes, fresh herbs with light foods. These weren't stylistic decisions. They were patterns medieval cooks discovered through daily repetition. When you choose herbs for vegetables or garlic for heavier dishes, you're following instinctive logic created long before recipe books existed. One of the clearest medieval influences in modern kitchens is our sense of balance. Medieval cooks understood the importance of combining warm, comforting flavors with cooler, refreshing ones. They paired hearty stews with fresh greens, heavy breads with lighter toppings, warm dishes with mild sides. This wasn't science, it was lived experience. They noticed that certain meals felt complete only when complemented by something gentler. When you add a salad to a rich main dish or pair a warm soup with bread, you're continuing a medieval balancing act. Sweetness, too, carried a similar quiet tradition. Medieval people added small touches of sweetness, not large, overwhelming amounts. Honey, fruits, or dried berries soften the sharpness of savory dishes. Today, modern cuisine still uses sweetness to create comfort. A small piece of fruit after meals, a drizzle of honey in warm drinks, a gentle touch of sugar in certain dishes. We rarely question why sweetness feels calming in small amounts, but medieval kitchens discovered this through long, quiet practice. Another medieval flavor principle that still shapes modern dishes is the importance of mildness. Medieval palates rarely chased intensity. Most food was meant to soothe, not shock. Too much seasoning was seen as unnecessary. Too much salt or spice overwhelmed the natural taste of ingredients. That instinct still exists. Even now, many people gravitate toward dishes that feel balanced rather than intense. Warm soups, mild porridges, soft breads, gentle stews. These comforting dishes remain popular because medieval kitchens established them as the emotional backbone of everyday eating. And then there's the habit of seasoning in layers. Medieval cooks didn't add everything at once. They seasoned lightly, tasted, adjusted, and then added a little more if needed. This slow layering allowed flavors to blend gradually, helping them develop more depth without becoming overwhelming. Today, countless home cooks still follow the same pattern, adding salt, tasting, then adding a little more. It isn't modern technique, it's inherited instinct. Even the timing of seasoning has medieval roots. Some ingredients went into the pot early to soften and infuse flavor. Others were added near the end to preserve their freshness. This awareness survives in modern cooking. Think of how fresh herbs go in last, how delicate ingredients are added gently, how heavier spices simmer longer. Medieval logic guides this even when we don't consciously think about it. One of the most fascinating medieval habits still alive today involves acidity. Medieval cooks didn't have citrus everywhere, but they used what they had: vinegar, fermented liquids, tart fruits, to brighten dishes and sharpen flavors. They learned early that acidity balanced heaviness, lifted warm dishes, and refreshed tired palates. Today, we reach instinctively for vinegar, lemon juice, tomatoes, or yogurt to add brightness. We do it naturally, but it's a medieval lesson disguised as modern taste. Another strong medieval influence is the idea that food flavor improves with time. Stews tasted better the next day. Breads developed flavor as they rested. Herbs released more aroma after being dried and stored. Today, we still value leftover soups or stews that seem richer after resting. We still let dough rise slowly. We still notice how flavors deepen in marinated foods. Time has always been an ingredient, one medieval cooks mastered long before refrigeration or modern tools. Medieval cooks also understood the emotional side of flavor. Certain tastes comforted after long days of work: warm broths, soft breads, and gentle porridges. Others revived energy: fresh vegetables, crisp herbs, or mild fruits. Even today, we crave certain foods for comfort and others for refreshment. These patterns feel personal, but in truth they are cultural memories, echoes of a time when food as emotional comfort mattered as much as its nourishment. Another medieval flavor logic still shaping our kitchens is the grouping of ingredients based on temperature. Not physical temperature, but emotional temperature. Warm dishes, warm spices, and warm textures were used for calming. Cool ingredients, crisp textures, and fresh flavors were used for balancing. This emotional classification still guides modern meals. When someone is tired, they choose warm food. When it's hot outside, they choose something cool. When they feel heavy after a meal, they crave something fresh. These instincts were formed long before anyone spoke about flavor theory. Even the way we season to bring out flavor is medieval. Medieval cooks understood that salt wasn't just salty. It made ingredients taste more like themselves. Herbs didn't just add new notes. They enhanced what was already present. Today, cooks still use salt to enhance flavors, still add herbs to deepen aroma, still use mild spices to round out dishes. The logic hasn't changed at all. Finally, there is the medieval belief in modesty with seasoning. Rarely did cooks drown dishes in strong tastes. They believed food should taste like what it is, vegetables tasting of vegetables, grains tasting of grains, meats tasting of themselves. Modern preferences, even in the most contemporary kitchens, often follow this same principle. The idea of letting ingredients shine feels modern, but it's medieval wisdom living quietly in our present. When you step back and look at all these habits together, you see that medieval people created a quiet map of how food should taste, how warmth, freshness, sweetness, acidity, and mildness balance one another. They did this through daily life, not theory. Their kitchens were classrooms, their senses the only tools. And through countless meals cooked slowly over fire, they shaped instincts that traveled through time, carried by generations of cooks until they reached us. We might not think of ourselves as inheritors of medieval taste, but we are. Every time we choose flavors that feel right, every time we balance a dish with something fresh, every time we use sweetness gently, every time we season in layers or trust our senses, we are quietly following culinary wisdom shaped centuries ago. In the next chapter, we'll drift into the medieval approach to preserving food, how drying, storing, salting, and planning shaped entire communities, and how those old methods still quietly influence our modern eating habits without us ever noticing. If you picture a medieval kitchen trying to prepare for the days, weeks, or even months ahead, you'll begin to understand just how essential preservation was for daily survival. These were times when food never sat safely behind refrigerator doors, when the climate controlled nothing, and when every household required quiet planning to make sure ingredients didn't vanish faster than they could be gathered. And yet, what's most remarkable is not how different those preservation methods were from ours, but how many of their underlying habits still live inside our modern routines, even though the tools have changed entirely. If you stood in a medieval home as people worked on storing food, the first thing you'd notice is how attentively they observed the natural qualities of each ingredient. They didn't preserve food because they wanted variety. They preserved because they had to think ahead. But in doing so, they developed a deep, instinctive understanding of how foods behave, how they last, and what conditions they prefer. Those instincts never faded. They became the foundation of everything we do today when we try to keep our own food fresh, even if our methods look different on the surface. Imagine someone in the Middle Ages handling produce freshly gathered from the fields. The first thing they would do is sort it, not by aesthetic beauty, but by longevity. Foods that spoiled quickly needed to be used immediately. Those with thicker skins or firmer textures could wait. Today, this quiet sorting still happens without us thinking about it. When you bring groceries home, you instinctively use the most fragile produce first. You save sturdier items, potatoes, onions, apples, for later. This isn't a modern insight. It's a medieval instinct that stayed with us through centuries. One of the most fundamental medieval preservation habits was the separation of foods by moisture level. Medieval cooks knew, purely from observation, that dry food stayed stable longer, while anything moist needed care or quick consumption. So they stored grains, nuts, and dried items far from damp air. They kept vegetables with higher moisture content in well-ventilated places. Today, our tools are more advanced, but the logic is identical. Dry ingredients live in dry cabinets, away from sinks or steamy areas. Moist foods go straight to cooler spaces. We rarely think about the reason, but medieval kitchens already solved this long ago. Salt, the great preserver of the medieval world, played a central role in how people approached food storage. It wasn't just a seasoning, it was a tool for survival. Salt drew moisture out of foods, extending their life. It protected meats, fish, and even some vegetables. Even though modern families don't rely on salt for preservation in the same way, the instinct to cure, brine, or pickle is still alive. Many households today still enjoy pickled vegetables, fermented dishes, brined foods, not because they must, but because those old methods created flavors and textures people still love. Modern pickling jars are simply polished versions of medieval clay pots. Drying was another medieval essential. Herbs hung from beams. Fruits dried near warm spots. Meat was suspended in cool, airy spaces. By reducing moisture, foods became lighter, easier to store, and far more long-lasting. And although we now use dehydrators or racks instead of rafters and hearths, the concept is the same. Dried fruits, dried herbs, dried spices. These choices are not conveniences born from modern technology. They are echoes of a time when drying was one of the few reliable methods to preserve the harvest. Then there was the practice of storing foods in cool, dark environments. Before refrigeration, medieval people studied their homes and landscapes with remarkable patience. They found the coolest corners, the places untouched by sunlight or heat, often near thick stone walls or below-ground spaces. Root cellars became essential food storage rooms. They protected vegetables, grains, and fruits through cold seasons. Today's refrigerators are simply the modern version of the medieval cellar, a cold, dark, controlled space where food waits safely. And even beyond appliances, many modern pantries still mimic the old approach. Shelves away from sunlight, cooler corners, darker cabinets. All habits shaped by survival centuries ago. Fermentation, another ancient method, remains deeply woven into modern life. Medieval people fermented not because of flavor trends, but because fermentation transformed short-lived foods into stable, nourishing ones. Cabbage became long-lasting fermented vegetables. Grains turned into preserved drinks or porridges. Dairy transformed into cheeses or stable cultured products. Modern kitchens still rely on fermented food everywhere. Yogurt, cheese, pickles, sourdough, kombucha, kimchi. We may enjoy these for taste today, but medieval people created the habits for necessity. Another quiet medieval preservation habit still seen today is the idea of cooking something with the intention of making it last longer. Medieval stews or broths were often made in large batches not because of abundance, but because cooking introduced heat, which protected food for a short time. Today, many families still make large pots of soup, stew, or pasta and save portions for later, not only for convenience, but because cooked food still preserves itself briefly in the same way it once did centuries ago. Even the idea of wrapping food to protect it is medieval in origin. Medieval cooks wrapped cheese in cloth, bread in linen, and meats in parchment like leaves or skins. Today we wrap food in plastic, foil, or paper, slightly more modern materials, but the same ancient instinct. Cover the food to slow the air from changing it too quickly. Wrapping might feel simple or automatic today, but its roots stretch far into the past. Medieval households also understood the importance of spacing food. They kept stored ingredients away from heat sources, away from smoke, away from damp corners. Even when storing multiple foods together, they left air pockets so things could breathe. Modern households still keep foods away from ovens, avoid placing perishables near heating vents, and give fruits or vegetables air circulation to prevent spoiling. These small habits remain unchanged because the logic behind them has never stopped being true. One of the most powerful medieval preservation instincts still alive today is the idea of planning foods for the entire week, not just the day. Medieval homes planned meals with careful thought, using fresh produce first, preserving what could last longer, and managing stores so nothing spoiled unnecessarily. Many modern households still plan meals in cycles, using delicate ingredients early, preparing heartier items later, and working through perishables with quiet strategy. Even grocery shopping cycles, weekly rhythms, and meal planning are distant reflections of medieval life. Perhaps the strongest medieval preservation influence we still follow is the emotional comfort of having a stocked pantry. Medieval people stored food not only to survive, but also to feel prepared, safe, and secure. Today, even with constant access to markets, many people maintain pantry shelves filled with grains, spices, dried goods, and long-lasting ingredients. This isn't only about convenience. It is a deep, centuries-old instinct, the comfort of knowing the home has what it needs. What makes all these habits remarkable is that we don't consciously think of them as medieval. We don't pause and say, "I will store this because someone 8 centuries ago decided this was wise." They simply persist because they were always practical, always effective, always grounded in human observation. Technology replaced the tools, but it didn't replace the logic. The heart of preservation, understanding what food needs in order to last, hasn't changed at all. So as you wrap leftovers, place produce in its right spot, store grains in a dry cabinet, keep oils away from light, save jars of pickles, or keep extra dried foods on hand, you're echoing the quiet routines that shaped medieval homes. Those homes preserved food not by choice, but by necessity. Modern homes preserve food by instinct, convenience, or flavor, but the rhythms remain the same. In the next chapter, we'll explore how medieval ideas about meal timing, pacing, and food order influenced the structure of modern eating schedules, and why the simple idea of when to eat what is more ancient than most people think. If you look at the way your day moves from morning to evening, the moments when you pause to eat, the times when meals feel right, and the quiet ways food anchors the rhythm of your routine, you might assume this pattern is modern, shaped by schools, workplaces, or convenience. But if we drift far back into the medieval world and watch how people organize their meals, something familiar immediately appears. Their understanding of when to eat, what to eat at certain times, and how meals naturally divide the day has survived so quietly and so completely that many of us are still following their patterns without even realizing it. To understand why, imagine a medieval morning. The sun hasn't fully risen, the air is cool, and households stir slowly into motion. Before work begins, before fields are tended or workshops open, people take a small meal, not a feast, not a heavy dish, but something simple: bread, warm drink, fruit, or grains. This gentle beginning wasn't just tradition, it was practical. Mornings required awakening, not weighing down. And somehow, centuries later, most of us still treat breakfast the same way. Light, calm, and easy. Not because a modern diet told us to, but because this rhythm of a simple morning start feels as natural now as it felt hundreds of years ago. As the medieval morning progressed into midday, something important happened. Activity intensified. Fields filled with workers, streets filled with merchants, workshops glowed with heat and sound. People needed strength, not small comfort, but real energy. And so the largest meal of the day gathered around midday. It wasn't called lunch in the modern sense, but its purpose was the same. It refueled the body for the busiest part of the day. This wasn't a personal preference. It was a necessity deeply tied to the demands of daily life. Today, despite modern schedules, many cultures still place their most substantial meal in the middle of the day. Even where dinner has become larger, the body still responds most comfortably when midday meals carry the most energy. Workers take lunch breaks. Schools provide meals at midday. Restaurants fill at noon. We might not notice it, but the medieval idea of fuel the middle of the day didn't vanish. It evolved into the core structure of modern daytime eating. As afternoons softened into evening in medieval homes, the rhythm of meals shifted once again. The heavy work was done. The hearth's flames burned lower. People didn't need strength, they needed calm. And so, the evening meal was mild, simpler, easier to digest. Often warm, often comforting, but never heavy. Something that eased the body toward rest rather than preparing it for labor. In many parts of the world, this rhythm remains intact. Light dinners are still common, still encouraged, still preferred by those who listen to their bodies. Even in places where dinner has culturally become the bigger meal, people still recognize how gentle, calming evening foods feel easier and more natural, because the logic is ancient. What might surprise you is that medieval people didn't need doctors or knowledge of nutrition to shape this schedule. They learned through observation. They listened to their bodies and lived through routines where energy needs were obvious. And because these habits worked so well, they became traditions, then instincts, then cultural patterns that simply never left. Another medieval meal habit that survived into modern times is the idea of spacing food with intention. Meals weren't scattered randomly throughout the day. They acted as landmarks, points that divided time into manageable sections. Morning meal began the day's momentum. Midday meal broke the labor in half. Evening meal softened the transition into rest. We still follow this structure. Breakfast marks the start. Lunch creates a pause. Dinner closes the day. These meals create psychological boundaries even today. One of the most interesting medieval meal patterns still alive today is the quiet rule about waiting between meals. Medieval people rarely snacked constantly, not because they avoided it intentionally, but because food preparation took time. Meals were organized, not spontaneous. And although modern life offers endless snacks, many people still feel better when they keep a calm space between meals, a gentle pause where the body resets. This rhythm, though altered over time, reflects the medieval instinct of eating in steady, meaningful intervals rather than continuously grazing. Medieval meal timing also carried a sense of togetherness. Households gathered at predictable times. Work paused. Families returned. Meals marked moments of reunion. That tradition still remains. Families gather for dinner. Friends meet for lunch. Breakfast often becomes a shared morning ritual. Even in busy homes, the idea of eating together at certain times is deeply rooted in the medieval understanding that meals weren't just food. They were connection. Another subtle medieval influence is the tradition of pre-meal and post-meal rituals, small transitions that made mealtimes feel complete. In medieval homes, people didn't jump into eating immediately. They settled, arranged seating, or shared quiet words before beginning. After meals, they didn't rush away. They lingered, talked, or simply enjoyed the warmth. Modern homes still hold on to these patterns. People settle before eating. They linger afterward. These transitions feel natural because they're ancient. A particularly gentle medieval habit survives in the way we think about mornings. Medieval mornings weren't chaotic or filled with heavy food. They began softly, with mild nourishment to wake the body. This slow start to the day still shapes how many people approach breakfast. Even when time is short, most people prefer something gentle: fruit, grains, eggs, tea, bread. This simple morning style fits us because it fitted those who lived long before us. Another old rhythm still alive today is the habit of drinking warm beverages in the morning. Medieval people often drank warm broth, warm water, or warm herbal infusions early in the day. The idea was instinctive. Warmth awakens without overwhelming. And even today, people around the world begin their mornings with warm drinks: tea, coffee, warm water, cocoa. It is one of the clearest medieval customs still present in the modern world. And then there's the idea of ending the day with something small, warm, and calming. Medieval homes often finished evenings with simple foods, something that soothed, not energized. Modern life still keeps this instinct alive. Many people prefer light dinners, warm soups, small dishes before bed. Even those who eat larger dinners often seek something soft or warm later to settle the body. Perhaps the most enduring medieval influence on meal rhythm is the emotional meaning of food timing. Meals weren't just functional. They set the tone of the day. Morning meals gave clarity. Midday meals gave strength. Evening meals gave comfort. Today, we still feel this emotional order. Breakfast prepares us. Lunch refuels us. Dinner relaxes us. These feelings aren't new. They're carried across centuries of human experience. Even the idea of weekend meals or special day meals has medieval roots. Medieval households adjusted meal structure slightly on days of rest, market days, or family gatherings. They treated food differently when time felt different. Modern people do the same. Weekend meals tend to be slower, shared, or more elaborate. What stands out is how natural these medieval rhythms feel even now. They weren't imposed by rules or taught in schools. They formed through lived experience, through thousands of families learning what felt right for human energy and comfort. Modern science might explain why these rhythms work, but medieval life discovered them long before anyone wrote them down. When you look at your own eating schedule, when you choose something light in the morning, something stronger in the middle of the day, something soothing at night, you're following patterns that began long before electricity, long before markets, long before recipes. These rhythms survived because they made sense. They survived because they supported people's lives. And most of all, they survived because they felt right. In the next chapter, we'll explore medieval hospitality and serving customs. The gentle ways people welcomed guests, shared food, and created comfort at their tables, shaping traditions of generosity and hosting that still guide how we treat guests today. If you imagine stepping into a medieval home as a guest, You might expect cold stone, stiff manners, or formal rituals. But the truth is far softer, far more familiar. Hospitality was not a performance. It was an instinct, a quiet, deeply human understanding that when someone entered your home, even for a short visit, you offered them comfort through food, warmth, and small gestures of care. These gestures were never announced as rules, yet they drifted through time and settled into the way we welcome people today. To understand this, imagine arriving at a medieval household at the end of a long journey. Before words were exchanged, before questions were asked, someone would direct you toward the warmth of the hearth. You might be offered water, or bread, or a simple warm dish, not because it was required, but because it was the natural way families expressed kindness. The first instinct was not conversation, it was nourishment. And incredibly, this instinct still lives within us. When guests arrive at modern homes, many people instinctively offer tea, coffee, water, or small snacks. They invite guests to sit in the most comfortable spot. They create warmth through food, just as medieval homes did centuries ago. If you stayed longer in that medieval home, you would see that hospitality was built on small, unspoken habits. Medieval hosts offered what they had, not what they wished they had. There was no pressure to impress. Instead, the goal was to make guests feel settled, safe, and included. In modern homes, this same gentle logic remains. When someone visits, people offer simple comforts: a warm drink, a place to sit, a blanket on cool evenings, or a spot at the table. These gestures are almost instinctive, a continuation of the medieval belief that comfort begins with care, not abundance. Another medieval custom that survived into modern hospitality is the act of giving guests the best seat. In medieval homes, the warmest spot near the hearth was often offered to travelers, not because it was symbolic, but because warmth meant rest, and rest meant kindness. Today, many families still guide guests toward the most comfortable chair, the coziest corner, or the seat with the best view. We rarely think about why. It simply feels right, a soft echo of the past where warmth was a gift. Food sharing in medieval hospitality was also deeply symbolic. When guests arrived, even unexpectedly, households made room at the table. Meals were stretched, portions adjusted, bowls refilled. Hosts would sometimes eat less themselves to ensure their guests ate enough. This wasn't a gesture of sacrifice, it was a natural expression of generosity. And today, even in modern kitchens, when guests join a meal, people instinctively serve them first, offer them larger portions, or give them the most appealing piece of bread or fruit. We still treat guests with the same humility medieval hosts practiced, without ever thinking of it as tradition. If the medieval household had limited ingredients, they still found a way to make meals feel special for visitors. They used the freshest produce, the warmest dishes, or the softest bread available. This quiet intention, to share the best of what one has, remains deeply rooted in modern culture. Even in homes where meals are casual, hosts often save certain dishes or special plates for guests. We might modernize the tools, but the instinct is the same. Give guests something that feels chosen, not leftover. Another medieval tradition we still follow is the act of slowing down when someone visits. In medieval times, daily chores paused. Conversation replaced work. People made time to sit and talk because hospitality wasn't about offering things. It was about offering presence. Today, this instinct remains strong. When guests come, people set aside their tasks, silence distractions, and prioritize connection. Even in busy homes, visits create calm moments, small pockets of time where the household shifts its focus toward the person who has arrived. Medieval hospitality also included the custom of insisting gently, encouraging guests to take more food, to drink, to settle, to relax. This wasn't pressure, it was reassurance. It was the host's quiet way of saying, "You are welcome here." In modern homes, this instinct remains. Hosts tell guests, "Please take more, let me refill that," or "Are you comfortable?" These phrases come from a tradition far older than we realize, shaped in homes where comfort was created conversation by conversation. One of the most enduring medieval hospitality traits is the treatment of guests as part of the household rhythm. Medieval visitors were not isolated. They were included, invited to sit near the fire, to participate in light tasks, to share stories. The rhythm of the home temporarily shifted to embrace them. Modern hospitality preserves this same rhythm. Guests are invited into the kitchen while food is prepared, encouraged to help with small tasks if they choose, or welcomed into the heart of the home. The idea that visitors should feel included rather than simply observed is a medieval instinct still alive today. Another gentle medieval habit remains in the way meals were served to guests. Hosts often placed dishes within easy reach, arranged food so guests wouldn't need to stretch or strain, and ensured plates were filled before their own. Today, we see the same instinct. Hosts set the table thoughtfully, place serving spoons near guests, pour drinks for them first, and listen carefully for small needs. It is not etiquette, it is inheritance. Even the way medieval households ended a visit quietly survives in our modern culture. When a guest prepared to leave, medieval hosts offered something small for the journey, a bit of bread, fruit, or a warm drink. Today, hosts might offer snacks for the road, or fill a bottle of water, or send guests home with leftovers. This tradition feels natural because it is ancient, the gentle instinct to send someone away feeling cared for. One of the most powerful medieval hospitality customs is the belief that hosts should make guests feel unhurried. Medieval homes, even when busy, created a small pocket of calm around the visitor. People didn't rush their guests to leave. They offered time, space, and conversation. Modern households still honor this practice. Even when schedules are tight, most people try not to make guests feel rushed. They walk them to the door, extend conversations, or share a final moment of warmth before parting. Another medieval instinct that remains is the offering of simple comfort items. Medieval hosts gave blankets on cold days, warm drinks when weather changed, or seating near warmth. Modern hospitality mirrors this quietly. Hosts offer blankets, adjust lighting, control room temperature, or provide pillows. These gestures may seem modern, but the instinct is timeless. Comfort is kindness. Medieval hospitality was also shaped by the idea that guests brought life into the home. They carried stories, news, and presence. Hosting was not a burden, it was enrichment. Many people today still feel a gentle joy when guests visit, the feeling that homes become warmer with company. This emotional response is a distant echo of medieval households that valued shared moments over solitary routine. The deeper truth behind medieval hospitality is simple. It wasn't about extravagance. It wasn't about wealth. It wasn't about complicated meals or elaborate displays. Hospitality was built on warmth, care, and the gentle understanding that food and comfort bind people together. And this truth has lasted. Modern hospitality, for all its variations, still follows the medieval logic. Welcome warmly. Offer comfort. Share what you have. Make time. Give your best. Send people away feeling cared for. These are not etiquette rules. They re-human instincts. Instincts shaped in fire-lit kitchens and stone-built homes where connection mattered as much as nourishment. In the next chapter, we'll explore medieval household roles around food, how families cooperated in cooking, gathering, serving, and storing, and how those communal roles shape the way modern households share kitchen responsibilities today. If you stepped into a medieval household during the steady rhythm of daily food preparation, you would immediately sense the gentle cooperation that kept everything running smoothly. Medieval kitchens were rarely the responsibility of one person. Instead, they were living spaces filled with shared duties, instinctive cooperation, and a quiet division of tasks that evolved not from strict rules, but from experience, practicality, and the natural flow of the day. And what's remarkable is how many of those cooperative habits still guide the way modern families and households work in the kitchen today. The medieval kitchen wasn't a formal workplace. It was a communal space, a place where people talked, warmed their hands, prepared ingredients, and shared moments of rest between tasks. Even though we often picture it as a busy, smoky place filled with noise and motion, it also had a calm rhythm when viewed up close. People moved around each other effortlessly, each understanding their role without needing instructions. This sense of shared purpose still survives in modern homes, where families drift through cooking tasks together, each person naturally gravitating towards certain responsibilities. One of the most ancient medieval habits that remains in modern households is the idea that kitchen tasks belong to whoever is available rather than to one assigned person. In medieval times, whoever passed the hearth might stir the pot. Whoever came back from gathering might wash vegetables. Whoever finished a task first might check the fire. The idea of help where help is needed was instinctive. Today, we still follow this quiet logic. Even in households where one person cooks more often, others step in. Someone chops vegetables, someone sets the table, someone washes dishes, someone dries them. It's not formal teamwork, but a continuation of medieval cooperation. Children in medieval homes learned kitchen tasks by simply being near the work. They watched adults knead dough, gather herbs, or stir stews. Without lessons or instructions, they absorbed knowledge through observation. Modern children learn kitchen habits in the same way. They watch adults cook. They help mix ingredients, rinse produce, or carry small items. These moments feel simple, but they mirror centuries of quiet learning passed down through kitchens where wisdom traveled through watching rather than formal teaching. Medieval households also understood that some tasks naturally suited certain people based on their daily rhythm, skill, or temperament. Some preferred fire tending. Others enjoyed kneading or grinding grains. Some had a sharper eye for selecting ingredients. These preferences weren't rules. They were natural inclinations that shaped the flow of work. Today, even in modern kitchens filled with appliances and tools, people gravitate toward the tasks they enjoy. One person loves chopping, another enjoys seasoning. Someone else prefers washing dishes or organizing shelves. This division feels personal, but it mirrors the same ancient instinct to let people do what feels natural to them. Another medieval household habit that survived is the idea of preparing ingredients in quiet stages rather than all at once. In medieval kitchens, someone might wash vegetables in one moment, while another person chopped them later, and another person cooked them much later. These staggered tasks kept the kitchen flowing without stress. Modern kitchens still work this way. One person preps ingredients early, another finishes them later. Some tasks happen in the morning, others at night. This rhythm came from medieval kitchens where food simply needed time. Time to soften, dry, warm, or cool, and the household followed along with it. The communal nature of medieval kitchens also created the habit of announcing small tasks. When someone added wood to the fire, they might mention it so others would adjust their cooking times. When someone finished washing a bowl, they'd place it where others could reach it. These little spoken cues kept everyone synchronized. Today, we still do this in our own homes. The water's boiling, the oven is ready, the cutting board is free. I've washed these vegetables. Dinner will be ready soon. These phrases flow naturally because they grew from centuries of shared kitchens where communication kept everything gentle and coordinated. In medieval homes, ingredients were often gathered by multiple people. One person picked herbs from the garden, another fetched water, another carried wood, another brought a small basket of vegetables. The idea that food preparation begins before entering the kitchen still holds today. Families pick up groceries together, carry bags in, unpack items, or help set things out on the counter. We treat gathering as part of cooking, a medieval instinct that never changed. Medieval kitchens also had shared roles when it came to tasting. The person nearest the pot might taste the broth, offer an opinion, or make a small adjustment. Taste was communal, shaped by multiple senses, not just one. Today, families still share in tasting. Someone asks, "Needs more salt?" or "Is it good?" Tasting together connects people, linking them to the same ancient practice of trusting multiple voices around food. Cleanup in medieval homes was also a communal ritual. Once meals were done, the household didn't disappear. People stayed, cleaned the table together, rinsed bowls, hung cloths, stacked pots, and returned utensils to their places. Cleanup was part of mealtime, not a separate chore. Modern families maintain this rhythm. Even if only one person washes dishes, others often dry, wipe surfaces, or put things away. That sense of shared responsibility remains deeply embedded. Another powerful medieval influence is the way homes treat leftovers. Medieval households didn't assign the task of managing leftovers to one person. Whoever had time or attention took on the responsibility, covering bowls, placing them in cool spots, portioning them for later. Modern homes still treat leftover handling as fluid. Someone might pack them into containers, someone might label them, someone might finish them the next day. This flexibility was born from medieval necessity. Medieval kitchens also shaped a quiet but important household habit, respecting the person actively cooking. When someone was stirring a pot or kneading dough, others gave them space, not because it was a rule, but because the task required focus. Today, even in the busiest homes, People instinctively avoid crowding someone who is chopping, pouring, or cooking. We say things like, "Careful, I'm cutting," or "hot pan coming through." That respect for the act of cook is centuries old. Another medieval role that endured is the idea that mealtime decisions are shared. Medieval families discussed what to cook based on what was available, who was hungry, and what needed to be used soon. Decisions weren't top-down, they were collective. Today, families still ask each other questions like, "What should we eat tonight? Does anyone feel like something warm? What do we have left?" This shared decision-making comes from a time when food was everyone's concern, not one person's responsibility. Even the act of gathering at the table reflects medieval structure. Meals brought everyone together not just to eat, but to share moments, exchange thoughts, and rest from the day. Modern families still use meals as a time to connect. Even in homes where schedules differ, people often find pockets of time to eat together. This instinct to bond over food comes directly from medieval homes where meals were the heart of family life. The deeper truth is that medieval kitchens were never isolated workspaces. They were the emotional center of the home, places where people cooperated without being told, learned without being taught, and moved around each other with an ease created by routine, necessity, and comfort. These habits grew into our modern kitchen instincts, helping without being asked, sharing tasks effortlessly, tasting together, cleaning together, gathering together, and treating food preparation as a quiet, collective rhythm rather than a solitary chore. Modern kitchens may look different. We have stovetops instead of hearths, counters instead of wooden tables, cabinets instead of storage bins. But the way we behave in these spaces, the way we divide tasks, support one another, follow natural rhythms, and treat mealtime as a moment of connection is deeply medieval. The medieval household wasn't just a group of people living together. It was a shared rhythm, a shared routine, a shared set of instincts. And those instincts, passed through centuries of kitchens, still guide us every day without us realizing where they came from. In the concluding chapter, we gently gather all these threads together, reflecting on why so many medieval food habits endured and how their quiet presence still shapes the way we live, cook, and eat in the modern world. As we reach the end of this gentle journey, it becomes clear that the way we eat today, how we cook, how we share meals, how we store food, how we welcome guests, and even how we schedule our days, is shaped far more by the medieval world than most of us ever realize. Their kitchens looked different, their tools were simple, their homes were warmed by fire instead of electricity, yet the rhythms they created continue to echo softly through our routines. We still store grains in dry places, protect oils from sunlight, wrap bread to keep it soft, soak ingredients overnight, let food rest before serving, and prefer warm drinks in the morning. We still gather to eat, share dishes from the center of the table, give guests the comfortable seat, and linger after meals. We still treat cooking as a shared responsibility, moving around each other naturally, tasting together, cleaning together, and preparing the next day's food with quiet intention. These aren't rules written anywhere. They are habits passed from kitchen to kitchen, from household to household, from one generation's instincts into the next. They survived not because someone insisted on preserving them, but because they made sense. They brought comfort. They created calm. And they helped people live gently with food long before technology simplified life. Modern kitchens glow with electricity instead of firelight, yet the heart of them hasn't changed. They remain places of gathering, warmth, nourishment, and togetherness, just as they were centuries ago. And every time you prepare a simple meal, save leftovers, share food with guests, or settle into the natural rhythm of breakfast, midday meals, and evening comfort, you are continuing a story that began long ago in homes with wooden tables and stone hearths. Thank you for drifting through this peaceful history tonight. If this calm journey helped you relax, unwind, or drift towards sleep, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment about which everyday habit surprised you the most. Your support keeps these quiet journeys alive. Sleep well, and until next time, good night.